This is BBC World News. I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. Our top stories. Tributes to a diver killed in the Thai cave rescue as efforts intensify to bring 12 boys and their football coach to safety. There are reports that oxygen levels are falling.
We had thought the children could survive there for a long time, but everything has changed. We have quite limited time.
The former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is to appeal against the 10-year prison sentence he's been given on corruption charges. China retaliates after the US imposes tariffs worth $34 billion, accusing Washington of starting the largest trade war in economic history. Also in the programme, the latest from the World Cup, where the first team has secured its place in the semi-finals.
I'm Ollie Foster, live in Moscow. That team is France after they beat Uruguay 2-0.
Hello and welcome to BBC World News. Authorities in Thailand are concerned about oxygen levels in the chamber where 12 young footballers and their coach have been trapped for almost 2 weeks in a flooded cave in the country's north. One volunteer diver has died after losing consciousness as he journeyed back. The Thai Navy, though, says it remains determined to get the boys out, whatever the challenges, but how to do so still is not clear. Jonathan Head is at the scene for us in Chiang Rai.
This is what it takes just to keep the trapped boys alive. And this is the easy part. The last part of the routine takes 6 hours and needs 6 heavy air tanks for each diver to get there and back. It was while returning from laying down those extra tanks that Saman Gunan, a 38-year-old former Navy diver, became unconscious and died. This is him just a week ago, as he boarded the plane to come here and help. Today, he was flown back to his hometown to a hero's funeral. His commander promised that their difficult mission would continue, but said time was running out.
We had thought the children could survive there for a long time, but everything has changed. We have quite limited time.
The death of this diver has brought home just how difficult it will be to try to pull these 12 weakened boys and their coach through flooded passages, which one diver described as like being in a darkened water tub and being battered by water. But the agonizing truth confronting the Thai authorities is that leaving them where they are through a rainy season that may well cut off their supply line could be much riskier.
The Thai government is trying everything. They're still scanning the jungle slopes for possible cracks in the rock that might lead to the caves. They're bringing in drills to drain the water and now to try to make a new exit. More ominously, they've brought in 5 kilometers of piping to try to get more oxygen into the depleted air of the cave. All the time, the impending rainy season threatens to complicate this rescue with a great deal more water. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Tham Luang Caves, northern Thailand.
Well, a short time ago I spoke to underwater cave rescue expert Ed Sorensen from Florida. I began by asking him if the loss of life of an experienced diver highlights the dangers of the rescue.
It really does. My condolences to his family. It's one of the hazards that we face as rescue and recovery divers, and which is why the IUCRR was founded, was so that people that were not trained for overhead don't have to do overhead type of rescues and recoveries. That's exactly why it was formed in 1999.
Does his death highlight even more, perhaps, just how difficult it is going to be to get those young children out? I mean, do you think that that is really a viable option?
Well, our position is we can't speculate on what's going over there. We're here and they're there. Every cave poses different challenges. Every cave has different makeup of how the air pockets are constructed. That cave probably has different air pockets, and some communicate to the surface, in other words, air transfers, and some don't. So is the oxygen levels diminishing in all the air pockets or just some of them? There's a lot of different problems that could be posed to rescuers of any completely water-filled or sump cave systems like that one there.
And can you just explain in general terms why the oxygen levels would fall and what are the particular hazards in this sort of situation?
Well, there's no way to tell why the oxygen levels would fall in a spot where there's not people at. Where people are, every time we breathe in, we metabolize oxygen and turn it into CO2. So all rescuers know to be aware of the 10-10 rule, and you know your oxygen can't get below 10%, or it's gonna be fatal, and your CO2 levels can't get above 10%, or it's fatal.
Ed Sorensen there, a dive rescue expert from Florida, speaking to me a short time ago. The former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has been sentenced to 10 years in jail by an anti-corruption court. He's been facing corruption allegations over his family's ownership of 4 flats in central London. Mr Sharif's daughter and political heir, Maryam Nawaz, was also sentenced to 7 years. Both are currently in London. Speaking outside the court in Islamabad, Mr Sharif's lawyer said he would appeal.
This decision will be challenged within 10 days before the Honorable Islamabad High Court, Division Bench of Islamabad High Court. Consists of 2 judges. They will in fact decide the fate of this case. Again, the entire case will be discussed before the Division Bench of Islamabad High Court, and their appeal will be filed along with suspension of the sentence.
Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent Sukunda Kamani in Islamabad.
To give you some background to this case, it revolves around 4 flats in central London, and the question has been where the money came from to buy these flats. Now, the Sharif family's links to the properties were revealed in the Panama paper leaks in 2016. That prompted an investigation in Pakistan, which led to Nawaz Sharif being dismissed as Prime Minister and him being sent to this anti-corruption court for trial, and today he was sentenced to 10 years in jail. Maryam Nawaz, his daughter, was sentenced to 7 years in jail. They were also fined £8 million and £2 million each. But in the last few minutes, Nawaz Sharif has been giving a press conference from London, where he is at the moment alongside his daughter. They're there, I should say, because Nawaz Sharif's wife is in a critical condition in hospital, and she's being treated for cancer. In this press conference, Nawaz Sharif stressed again that he denies any wrongdoing. He did say that he would be coming back to Pakistan, but he didn't specify when.
So is it expected that he would serve this sentence?
Well, it's not clear. Pakistan is going into the elections in just under 3 weeks' time, and the main contenders for these elections are, on the one hand, Nawaz Sharif's party, the PMLN; on the other hand, the PTI party led by Imran Khan, who's really championed these corruption allegations against the family. Some in Nawaz Sharif's party have said to me that they believe that if he were to return and were to go to jail, he could be seen as a kind of political martyr, and that could actually boost his party's chances in the elections. But it's not clear if he will return, when he will return, and what will happen when he does return. It is expected, however, that he will be appealing against the verdicts.
Sukunda Kamani. Let's look at some of the other stories. And talks are underway in Vienna to try to save the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In May, President Trump pulled the US out of the multinational deal, under which sanctions on Iran were lifted in exchange for curbs on its nuclear program. Tehran's threatened to leave the pact unless it's fully compensated for the reimposition of US sanctions. British ministers are holding a crunch meeting at the Prime Minister's country residence to agree a blueprint for Brexit. Theresa May's plan, which is 120 pages long, is expected to propose keeping the UK aligned with the EU on trading rules for goods but not services. It would also end the free movement of people. Mrs May could face opposition from at least 7 Brexiteer cabinet ministers. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in North Korea to press Kim Jong-un for details on his plans for denuclearization. US intelligence officials said last week they believe that North Korea had a number of secret nuclear sites and had increased production of enriched uranium. It's Mr. Pompeo's first visit since last month's summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. We have the details now on US President Donald Trump's visit here to the UK. The President and First Lady will arrive next Thursday for a two-day visit. He's going to meet Prime Minister Theresa May and also Queen Elizabeth. His visit will largely avoid London. The BBC's diplomatic correspondent James Robbins told me why that may be a strategic plan to avoid the large-scale protests that are planned.
This will almost certainly be the most controversial visit to Britain by any United States president. What we also know is that the President will start in Oxfordshire at the birthplace of Winston Churchill, one of his heroes, at Blenheim Palace. He'll get a military welcome there, but this is definitely not a state visit. And he'll be a guest among many British business leaders who, of course, are hoping to court extra business with and in the United States, as is the Prime Minister, who will be present, Theresa May, at that dinner in Oxfordshire. Then the President flies, probably by helicopter, one assumes, to the United States Ambassador's residence, which is a secluded mansion in Regent's Park in central London. It could be heavily guarded. That's really the closest, actually, that he'll get to London, and he'll thus avoid, I think, many of the protests, which I think will focus on the second day, on the Friday, when we're told that protesters have been given permission to fly an enormous balloon some 30 metres up in the air close to the British Parliament, depicting the President in orange as a baby in nappies. So that's a calculated insult, but he may not see it, actually, as he goes that day to Chequers, the Prime Minister's official residence, where he'll see Theresa May for a working lunch, and when he goes to Windsor to see the Queen, and then it's off to Scotland for golf.
So, yes, very much staying in sort of secluded areas. There was a lot of controversy when Theresa May extended the initial invitation to Donald Trump very, very early on in his presidency. What do both sides now want out of this visit, do you think?
I think it's clear that both sides recognise that this is a crucial relationship, regardless of who is president. This is often termed a special relationship, although that's a phrase perhaps more often used in Britain than in the United States. The two countries remain very close military and particularly intelligence allies, sharing intelligence, and they remain very close trading partners. And for Theresa May, Britain's Prime Minister, that remains of critical importance, particularly as she's negotiating a very tricky path towards Britain's exit from the European Union. So the British side wants very good relations with the United States and says that it should and must honour any man or woman who holds the office of President of the United States. It's the office which they're respecting by extending this invitation, and there's crucial business to be done. But as I mentioned, this is not the state visit to which he's already been invited, which involves the full British ceremonial, you know, horses and carriages and a banquet at Buckingham Palace. This is not that, and frankly no date has been set for that because it has proved so terrifically controversial.
James Robbins on that visit. Next week I'll be covering that live here for the BBC, and full coverage from all our teams around the country. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Much more ahead.
I'm Ollie Foster, live in Moscow at the World Cup. We have our first semi-finalists. It's France after they beat Uruguay 2-0. I'll have all the details after this short break.
This is BBC World News. I'm Geetha Gurumurthy with the top stories on our main headline today. Rescue efforts intensify in Thailand to get the 12 boys and their football coach trapped in a flooded cave to safety. There are reports that the oxygen levels in the cave have started to fall. I just want to show you pictures now from Chiang Rai because the live rescue operation is being coordinated, and the governor there of Chiang Rai is giving a briefing at the moment. We understand that he has said that there is some concern about the oxygen levels falling. Also, however, that more than 100 air holes have been found above the cave complex, 18 of them likely to be further explored. One stretches down 400 metres. But the drilling, of course, can be very time-consuming, as we heard from our correspondent on the ground, that this is a very, very rocky area. But we will update you on the latest from there as we get it. American sanctions against some Chinese products have come into force, with Beijing accusing the United States of igniting a trade war after Washington began imposing tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. Beijing is retaliating by imposing its own taxes on American produce, describing moves by the Americans as bullying. Well, the Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang said they would never start a trade war, but they would always take steps to protect China's development interests.
不是解决问题的办法。
Our view is that a trade war is never a solution. China would never start a trade war, but if any party increases tariffs, then China will take measures in response to protect China's development interests, uphold the authority and efficacy of the World Trade Organization, and to save the multinational trade regime.
多边主义和
While the effects of the trade tensions are also being felt in the US, and no one stands to lose more in this battle than America's soybean farmers, who send nearly 2/3 of their exports to China. Our correspondent Kim Gittleson is at a soybean farm in Minnesota. So, will the tariffs change things for those farmers?
For sure. So if you look behind me, there are rows and rows of soybeans. Every third row here gets sent abroad to China. It's the biggest export market for the soybeans that are grown here. And already farmers here are feeling the pain when it comes to this particular trade spat. Soybean prices have declined by 15% since the tariffs were announced in May. And many here told me that they're worried about if this trade war lasts for a long time. Now, the soybeans behind me won't be harvested until September. They're typically shipped abroad at the end of September and early October. And many here say that they hope that this particular trade battle will be finished by the time they're harvesting the crop. If that's not the case, they say that they fear for their survival.
And how much overall are their profits cut by then?
For sure. So when it comes to just the U.S. state of Minnesota alone, soybean revenues are expected to decline by $150 million. Overall, estimates place the U.S. soybean industry is losing anywhere between $3 billion and $4.5 billion just this year alone. And now the interesting thing about farmers here is that they're some of President Donald Trump's biggest supporters. In the county I'm in, they overwhelmingly favored the president in 2016. And so I was asking many of them, does this prospect of economic pain change your support for the president? And many of them said, look, they agreed that there was an unfair trade balance when it comes to the United States and the rest of the world, and China in particular, and that they support the president even if they may feel some economic pain here in the short term.
Is it expected that everyone down that chain of dependency on, for example, just that one soybean question would also hold firm for Trump? I mean, that is going to determine potentially his policies as we come up to the midterms at the end of the year.
For sure, and the state I'm in, Minnesota, has one of the most competitive Senate seats up for election in November. Many people call this a purple state because of a sort of 50-50 balance of support for Republicans and Democrats. And the question is if the rural areas here that supported President Donald Trump will turn away from him. So far, at least when I've been speaking to people here over the course of this week, that doesn't seem to be the case. But again, the question is what happens come those key harvest months in September and October, when farmers feel the pain of these lower prices, when they see that markets that they may have sold into, Brazil is gaining access to, Brazil being the other big exporter of soybeans. All of that is sort of a big open question mark when it comes to President Donald Trump's trade policies going forward.
Kim Gittleson there in Minnesota. Let's take you now back to Thailand because Dan Johnson is at Chiang Rai where the rescue operation is being coordinated, and we have got a briefing going on at the moment. Dan, just update us.
Yes, we're hearing from the provincial governor here. We did expect the Thai Interior Minister to speak, but he's left at the site here. It's just after midnight now here. He's left without speaking to anybody, so it's been left to the provincial governor here to give an update to the media, and he's just been explaining what has actually been going on over the last couple of days. He's made clear that an airline has been successfully put through the cave to the part where the boys are stuck. He says that's been successful and is now improving the oxygen level there. There was concern this morning that the oxygen level had got down to 15% when in normal air you would breathe 21% oxygen. That was a real concern earlier, so it sounds like they've made some progress on improving the oxygen situation with getting that airline in. The governor here has also said that letters have been sent in for the boys from their parents, although he's not sure if they've actually reached the boys and they've been able to read them yet. But if they do get those letters in the next few hours, then that will at least be some contact from their families, because all attempts to put a communication line in so that they could speak to their families haven't been successful yet. Now, he's also been talking about the possibility of digging down to get the boys out. That was one option that seemed to be being taken more seriously this morning, especially after that diver died on the way out of the cave. That really emphasised how dangerous that option would be for the boys, teaching them to swim, teaching them to use diving, scuba diving equipment so that they could swim out. If an experienced diver who'd worked with the Thai Navy for a long time could die in those circumstances, then that really did show the risk that those boys would be at. So drilling down was another option being talked about seriously this morning, and the governor's just revealed that more than 100 boreholes have been driven over the last few days. He says 18 of those are promising, that they may be getting towards the right area. He says they've dug down so far 400 metres, but they've calculated that to reach the spot where the boys are, they'd need to dig a hole of 600 metres. But he thinks with the holes they've dug already, they've worked out what the right angle is now to dig down. So that's obviously something that they are progressing with, but it's still a long way to dig, and the conditions in which they are doing that digging are really tough, because this is such a mountainous landscape, and the hills here are really steep and covered with really thick vegetation. So finding the points to actually start drilling down is a really tough question. Now, he's also said that if it does start raining heavily, then that could mean the water levels in the cave start rising again. He said if that happens, there is a kind of emergency plan to suddenly try and get the boys out. So they're not rushing towards that. I think what happened last night here, and the fact that this is already now a fatal accident, has underlined how challenging that would be and how dangerous it could be. So they're not going to rush to that option of diving the boys out, making them swim to freedom, because it's such a challenging obstacle course that they've got to negotiate underwater, underground. But they do have a backup plan if the water level starts rising and that becomes the only option. Then that is what they will do. There's been a renewed determination here today to make sure that they do get these boys out alive and that no one else dies in this operation, but they're also aware of just how tricky it's going to be. It could take some time yet.
Dan, I'm sure everyone's thoughts and prayers are with that rescue effort. Thanks very much for now. The first of the two quarter-finals of the 2018 World Cup has wrapped up with France beating Uruguay. Now Brazil and Belgium are gearing up to play. Kickoff is in under an hour. Well, Ollie Foster is in Moscow and has been watching all the action. I hear President Macron is going to be flying out for the semi-finals, Ollie.
Oh, you wouldn't want to miss that, would you? That's going to be in St. Petersburg. Don't know who the French are going to be facing yet. It'll be the winner from that Belgium-Brazil game. You just feel that the French are on something of a roll. 20 years ago, they were captained by Didier Deschamps when they won the World Cup on home soil. Didier Deschamps is the man leading them now from the dugout, and they were far too good for Uruguay. Uruguay had their chances, but it was the French who took a first-half lead. It was Raphael Varane, a lovely header, a glancing header from an Antoine Griezmann free kick. Hugo Lloris kept them in it, really. The French keeper, a wonderful save before the break, but then Uruguay went behind, an absolute clanger. It was Griezmann again with his a rocket of a free kick. It wasn't a free kick, it was an open play actually, that the Uruguay keeper Fernando Muslera, he just spooned it. It did have a bit of a swerve on it, but he just spooned it into his own net. So France 2, Uruguay 0. They are the first team into the semi-finals. It's a very European-heavy World Cup, this, because France through, Uruguay off, away now, exiting this tournament, heading home. Brazil are the only non-European side left in the World Cup, and they've got the Belgians coming up, as you say, Geeta, in the next 45 minutes, 35 minutes now in Kazan. That's going to be a fantastic match, we hope. A bit of Belgian team news. Fellaini and Nasser Chadli rewarded for their substitutes goals that got them past Japan at the death, coming from 2-0 down. So that's the second of the quarter-finals to look forward to for the right to play the French in the semi-finals.
Ollie, thanks very much indeed. Everyone's diaries in London are geared towards the England match tomorrow. We can't do anything else other than watch that game, whether we want to or not. And we will be covering it all for you here on the BBC over the weekend. I'm Geetha Gurmurthy. Do stay with us. Bye-bye.